in a marshy paddy field environment. The Rani of Jhansi Regiment was, as in the case of the INA, recognized as an essential part of the independent fighting force under the provisional government of Azad Hind. Our women who joined this regiment now clamored to be sent to the front. Every member was willing to die for what she considered as a sacred cause, India's freedom. Many of you have enjoyed freedom without any subjugation by a foreign power, may not be able to understand this. Many of our members who had left the environments of the estates found themselves free from the drudgery and what in reality was more a life of slavery. The retreat of the British management of the estates at the outset of war left them abandoned. The strong call made by Netaji reached them through the widespread working and networking of the Indian Independence League. This was when they found themselves for the first time completely freed from the heavy burden of being considered an underclass as coolies. For them, after World War II, and their having been fully fledged soldiers of INA's Rani of Jhansi Regiment, did make a lasting and permanent difference. They were no longer prepared to undergo the indignities of the pre-war world. I was the youngest in my family. Pampered, yes. But I became a soldier, strong. And we went on, we waited and waited. We sent pleas to be sent to the front. Movement of the Indo-Japanese army into Burma, into the Arakan area, and coming on to Imphal. The Rani of Jhansi Regiment, in the plan that was in his mind, this great indomitable leader of ours, Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, was that we would not be sent to the front line until we reached the border of Bengal. Bengal, which was a real dynamite, a whole force of freedom fighters. And it was just the right time. If they could see women soldiers, Indian sisters, dying on the front line, then it would be a meaningful rebellion which would come into India like the, not tsunami, but volcanic eruption, not tsunami. Then came, of course, events of the Indo-Japanese fighting force moving back. Let me explain to you. No Japanese flag flew over any territory which the Indian Japanese force went into in India. No Japanese flag. It was only the tricolor flag of India. And this I can assure you. However, you don't have to believe me, you just have to take whatever you think is correct. But I can tell you there's a lot of garbled version. Then, after that, we got the news. We could not go to the front line. We had to retreat. Our whole world seemed to shattered. We could not believe this was happening. We'd come all this way to go back to our homes, and not to be on the front line to fight for the freedom of our country. But that was the order. So we clicked our heels and started on the retreat. We went back through the same way, hazardous, attacked by air, by Allied power, and we escaped. Two of our Rani of Jhansi members were killed on our way back to Bangkok and through the death railway, etc. Then, of course, came the tragic news of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I have my very strong views about the atomic bomb. One bomb, when the war was almost over, and the Japanese defeat was almost certain. One bomb on Hiroshima, with difficulty you can understand that. But 2 bombs? Nagasaki? Justified? Was that not a massacre? Think about it. If it were to have happened here in Kuala Lumpur, what would we have to say about it? In the midst of all this, at the crisis, Netaji left Singapore, moved in. I must tell you that Netaji came with a second contingent from Rangoon to Bangkok, accompanying it on foot, by railway part of the time, and most of it on foot, together with them, because he knew these were the young girls and women that he had called to fight for India, and now they were retreating, and he knew that there would be lack of transport, lack of this, lack of the other. But he was the leader of the provisional government of Azad Hind. He was the prime minister, he was the minister of war, and he was the foreign minister. And so he led and he went through this area and he came to Bangkok, went to Singapore, and when Nagasaki and Hiroshima took place, the devastation, he came back to Bangkok. I was not able to go back with the contingent, the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, because I contracted very, very bad malaria. So I, with another 3, my sister would not leave me, and she was also a member of the Rani of Jhansi. And so we had a last meeting, and I remember the last meeting. Here was this man, a leader who had an indomitable will, courage, commitment, and dedication. He had united the Indians of Southeast Asia. He had brought out the best in each one of us. Lieutenant Das said that we were treated as, we were slaves. But when he came, he freed us. He freed the mental block that we had. And this is what was uppermost in his mind. The freedom of India. What he cared about was what he believed in. And what he believed in was India. The liberation of which he was convinced must mean that Indians will have to die, and Indians will have to be ready to lay down their lives in a war against the British in India. And when he was there, and the war was over, unconditional surrender of Japan, what about these 4 Rani of Jhansi Regiment girls? All of them had gone back. And he told the Indian Independence League leader, take them and they will be put as first-class boarders in the French convent, and fees for any subject will be paid for them. And within 6 months, they will either go back home or they would earlier be taken on as prisoners of war. And so we were there, ensconced in the French convent, when an INA officer came. We had already heard the tragic news of our leader's death in an air crash. And so they came and said that the British the British Army officers wanted to interview the Rani of Jhansi members who were there. So we went. This I will say, that the British officers who interviewed us were gentlemen. They knew what it was to take on a prisoner of war, and they extended every courtesy. Of course, they asked us questions, and we answered. And I remember one question which they asked us at Bangkok, and again in Penang, when we flew into Penang, was, are you going to join any movement in Malaya against the British? Well, do I remember my prompt reply? We are soldiers of the Indian National Army's Rani of Jhansi Regiment, and were prepared to engage in a war against the British for India's freedom, not for Malaya. There were no further questions. However, we returned home. And when we returned home, nobody questioned us. None of the Rani of Jhansi Regiment members were taken as prisoners of war. all of us were permitted to go back to our homes. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think Lord Louis Mountbatten was one of the prime movers, that this was the wisest move that they made, and certainly it was.